The kingdom of Arendor was a land where twilight lingered like a thick, unbroken veil. Even at midday, shadows stretched long across the cobbled streets, curling around towers and palaces like silent watchers. Here, magic was not a whisper but a constant hum, woven into the soil, the rivers, and the air. It was a kingdom of beauty and fear, of kings and queens, whose power could both protect and destroy. And in this twilight realm lived Elara, the woman cursed to bear no child. Elara's life was a careful balancing act. In the eyes of the court, she was a prize of unmatched beauty, her hair black as ravens, her eyes shimmering like storm clouds. But behind her soft smile lay a truth few dared speak. She was barren. She had whispered the word only to herself in the cold silence of her chambers. A confession carried on trembling lips. I'm barren. I'm barren. The words felt heavier than chains. They made her invisible in her own world, feared and pitied at once. No noble would claim her for fear of her curse, and the kings of distant lands whispered that a union with her would bring nothing but sorrow. Elara's life was one of quiet isolation, filled with whispered rumors and stolen glances. She had grown accustomed to shadows, finding a strange comfort in their constant presence. Then came the twins, Kael and Theron, alpha kings whose very names carried the weight of legend. They were not fully human. Some said their blood was touched by beasts, others by the old magic that ruled the mountains and forests of Arendor. Where one was calm and calculating, the other was untamed and feral, yet both shared a presence that demanded attention. When they arrived at the festival, the air itself seemed to bend, drawing every gaze toward them. Elara had prepared herself for judgment, for the polite dismissals and awkward conversations that had filled her life. Yet when they reached her, neither recoiled nor sneered at her whispered confession. Instead, Kael's eyes glimmered with dark amusement, and Theron's lips curved into a dangerous, slow smile. "Then we'll make you ours," they said in perfect unison. The words struck her like lightning. She wanted to run, to hide behind the velvet curtains of her chamber and pretend she had never spoken. But a part of her, a part she had long tried to bury, stirred with something dangerous and unfamiliar. Fear and curiosity tangled together, making her pulse quicken. These were not men who offered kindness or pity. These were men who saw her, every part of her, and were drawn not to what she lacked, but to the power she did not yet know she held. The festival faded around her. The music and laughter became distant echoes as the twins escorted her from the marble halls into the cool night air. Lanterns flickered along the streets, casting shadows that seemed to bow in deference. Elara felt the weight of their gaze, EDR Mara, heavy and unyielding, yet strangely protective. It was as if they were testing her, weighing her courage against their own hunger for something beyond mere possession. When they arrived at the palace, Elara's breath caught in her throat. It was not like the delicate, gilded palaces she had seen in dreams or on tapestries. This fortress was alive. Shadows clung to the towers, twisting and breathing with a life of their own. Walls shimmered faintly with magic, and corridors twisted in ways that defied reason. She could feel the palace's pulse under her feet, a rhythm that matched the unsteady beat of her heart. Kael led her through the halls with measured steps, his presence a calm tide against the storm she felt inside. Theron followed close behind, his eyes wild with fascination, as if he could taste the potential hidden in her blood. They did not speak, but their silence was filled with an unspoken command. Observe, learn, endure. Elara was both terrified and exhilarated. She had spent her life avoiding the very thing she now faced. Someone who saw beyond the surface. She realized, with a shock, that her curse, her barrenness was no longer a chain, but a key. The twins did not see weakness in her. They saw power restrained, waiting for the right moment to ignite. That night, in the solitude of her new chambers, Elara stared at her reflection in the polished obsidian mirror. She saw herself, but also the shadowed possibility of what she could become. Could she trust them? She wondered. Could she step into the darkness they offered, knowing it might consume her entirely? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Before she could answer, the door opened, and Kale stepped inside. His eyes were unreadable, a storm contained in human form. He did not speak immediately, only studied her with a patience that was both unnerving and comforting. "You did not run," he said finally. Elara's lips parted in surprise. I have nowhere to run." Theron appeared behind Kael, leaning against the doorframe. "And yet," he said, "you could leave at any moment. That choice is yours." His voice was low, rumbling like distant thunder. Elara's chest tightened. She had never been offered a choice before. Her life had always been dictated by what others feared she could not give. Now, for the first time, someone recognized that her will was as potent as any magic or bloodline. "You are more than your curse," Kael continued. "Do you understand that?" Elara swallowed hard. The truth of his words was a strange, sweet ache. She had spent years believing she was defined by absence, by what she could not offer. And yet here, in the presence of two men whose power rivaled the very land itself, she felt the faintest stirrings of possibility. Theron stepped forward, his eyes locking with hers. "We do not desire what you lack. We desire what you are." The words left her trembling, caught between disbelief and a dangerous hope. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen, and it terrified her as much as it drew her in. The twins left her then, retreating into the shadows of the palace, leaving her alone with the echo of their presence. Elara sank to the floor, her hands pressed against the cold stone, trying to ground herself. Her heart raced, her mind spun with questions she could not answer. Outside, the wind moaned through the towers, carrying with it a promise and a threat. Elara understood, in that quiet, shivering moment, that her life had changed forever. She could flee, return to the shadows she had always known, or step forward into the darkness and light intertwined. The night deepened, wrapping the palace in velvet shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a reminder of the untamed world outside these walls. Elara pressed her palms to her eyes, whispered a prayer to no one in particular, and allowed herself one moment of fear, one moment of longing, and then she heard it the faintest rustle, like silk brushing against stone. She knew without looking that the twins were near, watching, waiting. Their smirks were no longer words, but a presence, a magnetic force she could not resist. Elara rose slowly, her knees weak, but her spirit alight. She would not run. She could not. The kingdom of shadows stretched before her, dark and beautiful, terrifying and alive. And within that darkness, two kings waited hungry, dangerous, yet captivated by her in ways she had never imagined. For the first time, she felt the stirrings of something forbidden and powerful. Her curse, her barrenness, no longer defined her. Something else had awakened, a spark she could neither name nor contain. The palace walls seemed to hum with anticipation, the shadows curling tighter, whispering promises that only she could hear. The twins would not relent. The night would not release her. And Elara knew, deep in her bones, that the path before her was one she must walk, no matter how dark or uncertain. Somewhere in the heart of the fortress, Kael and Theron watched, their smirks both warning and invitation. And Elara, for the first time in her life, felt alive in a way that terrified her as much as it thrilled her. The story had begun, and there was no turning back. The palace of the Twin Kings was a world unto itself. Corridors twisted like living vines, and shadows moved with a will that seemed almost human. Lanterns floated without chains, their light bending to the will of unseen magic. Elara walked cautiously, her steps echoing softly across the polished stone floors. Though the place was breathtaking, she could not shake the feeling that it was alive, watching, testing her at every turn. Kale led her through a hall lined with towering tapestries that shimmered faintly, showing scenes of past victories, battles, and strange magical creatures. "This palace remembers," Kale said quietly. "Every step you take here is part of its memory. It watches those who enter. It knows intent." Elara shivered. She had always believed herself powerless, defined by the curse that had marked her since birth. But here, surrounded by living magic and two men who exuded power in ways that both frightened and fascinated her, she felt something stir within. Perhaps her curse was not the end of her story, she thought, but the beginning of something far more dangerous and far more vital. Theron appeared beside her, leaning slightly against a wall carved from black marble that gleamed like obsidian. "Do not let fear dictate your choices," he murmured. His voice was low, carrying the same undercurrent of wildness that made his presence both dangerous and irresistible. "Here, in the palace, courage matters more than anything." Elara nodded, unsure if she believed him. She had never been allowed to act freely before. Her life had been constrained by whispers, pitying glances, and the constant reminder that she could give nothing, that she could be nothing more than an empty shell. Yet these men saw her differently. They did not pity her. They saw power, potential, and a challenge. The twins guided her to a chamber unlike any she had ever seen. The walls glowed with a soft, shifting light, and in the center of the room stood a pool of water that reflected not only their faces, but the faint outlines of something deeper, something magical, that seemed alive. Kale gestured toward it. "This pool," he explained, "is tied to the bloodline of Arendor. It reflects what lies within a person. Step closer, and you will see yourself, not as the world sees you, but as you truly are." Elara hesitated, fear prickling her skin. She had avoided mirrors and reflections for years, unwilling to face the truth of what she had been told she lacked. But something in Kale's steady gaze urged her forward. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer. The water rippled, distorting her reflection until the surface shimmered and parted. For a moment, she saw not a barren, fragile woman, but a figure of quiet strength. Shadows twisted around her, forming shapes of life she had thought she could never create, shapes of power and vitality that made her heart pound. The reflection did not lie, it showed her potential, the magic within, and the strength that had always been hidden beneath her fear. Theron watched her closely, his expression unreadable. "The curse you carry is not a prison, Elara," he said softly. "It is a key. And keys are never useless. They open doors. Sometimes, doors no one else dares to touch." Elara's breath caught. For the first time, the idea that she could be more than her curse, that she could be more than what the world told her, seemed possible. And yet, with possibility, came fear. The palace was alive, yes, but it was dangerous, and so were the twins. Their fascination with her, their desire to claim her, was a force as powerful and unpredictable as the shadows themselves. Over the next days, the twins began a subtle but relentless test. Kale would challenge her mind, presenting riddles and puzzles that seemed impossible, each tied to ancient magic. Theron would push her physically, leading her through the twisting halls and shadowed chambers where even the floor seemed to shift beneath her feet. At first, Elara stumbled and faltered, nearly giving in to fear. But with each challenge, she discovered something new about herself, strength she had never known, courage that had lain dormant for years. In the quiet moments between tests, the tension between the three of them was palpable. Kale's gaze was steady, intense, like the eye of a storm, while Theron's eyes glimmered with wild curiosity, always just at the edge of control. Elara found herself drawn to both, their presence awakening feelings she could not name. feelings that danced between fear, longing, and the thrill of danger. One evening, as twilight settled into the palace like a soft cloak, Kale led her to a balcony overlooking the shadowed forest beyond. The wind was cold, carrying the scent of pine and distant magic. "You are learning quickly," he said. "But the palace tests only reveal part of the truth. Your true trial is understanding what you want and who you trust." Alara's heart thumped. She had spent her life obeying rules, hiding her desires, and fearing her own power. But now, standing between two men who could dominate her world with a thought, she realized she had a choice she had never truly had before. She could submit to fear, or she could step into the unknown, embracing the strange power stirring within her. Theron appeared beside her silently, his presence a contrast to Kale's calm authority. "Courage is not absence of fear," he said softly. "It is moving forward despite it. And sometimes, the most dangerous path is also the one that will lead you to yourself." The wind carried their words, weaving them into her very bones. Alara looked down at the forest, dark and endless, and felt a strange pull. The palace had become more than stone and magic. It was a mirror for her own soul, showing her what she might become if she could only accept it. Days passed, and the twins' influence on her grew. Alara began to recognize patterns in their behavior. The subtle ways they guided her without forcing her. The hints of vulnerability they revealed only when they believed no one was watching. She realized that Kael and Theron were not simply masters or predators. They were complex, fractured beings, bound by their own fears and desires, seeking redemption and purpose in ways they had never admitted. One night, the palace whispered warnings through the rustling of its enchanted halls. Alara awoke to find a strange light emanating from the pool in her chamber. Shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes she could not name, yet she understood instinctively that the magic was calling her. She approached cautiously, the twins following silently behind her. The water shimmered and parted again, revealing visions of her future, not a single path, but multiple possibilities intertwined, like threads of silver and shadow. She saw herself standing with Kael and Theron, not as a victim or prize, but as an equal, a partner in power. She saw battles fought and won, dangers faced together, and a bond forged in fire and trust. Her heart ached with longing and fear. Could she truly step into this world, knowing it would change her forever? Could she trust two beings so powerful that even a misstep could destroy her? Yet as she looked at the twins, standing silently behind her, she felt a quiet certainty. The palace, the magic, the challenges they had prepared her for this moment. And then, as if the shadows themselves had listened, the palace trembled. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the halls, like distant thunder. The water in the pool churned violently, and a figure appeared in the reflection, one she did not recognize. The figure's presence was cold, threatening, and ancient. Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. Kael's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. Theron's eyes blazed, wild and protective. "It has begun," Kael said, his voice calm, but filled with an edge that made her heart race. "The palace tests more than your courage, Alara. It tests your heart, your will, and the choices you make when faced with true darkness." Alara's mind raced. She had faced fear before, but this was different. This was not a riddle to solve or a challenge to endure. This was a confrontation with forces older and stronger than anything she had ever known. And yet, beneath the fear, a thrill ran through her veins. She was alive in a way she had never been. Drawn into a story that was larger than herself, filled with magic, danger, and the promise of something she had almost forgotten: hope. The twins flanked her, each a living force of power and presence. She realized, with a mix of awe and fear, that whatever awaited them would not just test her, but define the bond between them. And in that moment, she understood that she could not turn back. Elara drew a deep breath, her hand hovering over the shimmering surface of the pool. She could feel the pulse of the palace, the weight of her curse transforming into potential, and the twins' presence anchoring her in ways she could not fully comprehend. She was no longer the woman who whispered in the dark, afraid and powerless. She was something more, something dangerous, something alive. And then, with a whisper that carried across the chamber like a promise, the shadows shifted, and the figure in the water moved closer, its eyes gleaming with intent. Elara's heart pounded, and she looked at Kael and Theron, her resolve hardening. Whatever was coming, she would face it not as a victim, but as a force in her own right. The palace trembled around them, the night deepened, and a storm of power and destiny surged forward. Somewhere in the twisting corridors and shadowed halls, ancient magic stirred. The test had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The palace seemed to breathe with magic, its walls alive with whispers of old spells and hidden truths. Shadows coiled around corners, moving like sentient things, and the distant hum of ancient power vibrated through the stone floors. Elara moved cautiously, her senses alert, every instinct telling her that the figure she had seen in the pool's reflection was no ordinary threat. Kael and Theron flanked her, silent and watchful. Kael's calm, calculating presence was a shield, while Theron's untamed energy surged like lightning, ready to strike. Together, they were the perfect balance of control and chaos. And yet, as much as they protected her, Elara felt an unfamiliar thrill of power stirring within herself, a growing confidence she had never known. "This palace tests everything," Kael murmured, his dark eyes scanning the twisting corridors. "It tests courage, will, and heart. It does not forgive weakness." Elara nodded, gripping the edge of her cloak. She had faced fear before, but this was different. The palace itself seemed to respond to her thoughts, twisting the halls and shifting the shadows to challenge her. And the figure in the water, its eyes glowing with ancient intent, loomed over every thought she had. Theron stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on her arm. "Trust what you feel, Elara," he said softly. "The palace cannot harm those who understand themselves. It is not just a place of magic, it is a mirror." The twins led her to a grand hall, its ceiling vaulted high above, decorated with murals that shifted and shimmered. Scenes of warriors, beasts, and magic danced across the walls, their forms changing with each blink. In the center of the hall, a circle of light appeared on the floor, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. "This is your first true test," Kael said. "Step into the circle, and the palace will reveal what it sees in you. It will not lie. It will not yield. You must confront yourself, your fear, and your power." Elara hesitated, her mind racing. She thought of her curse, the years of isolation, the whispers of inadequacy that had followed her like shadows. And yet, beneath all that fear, she felt a spark, a faint warmth of strength she had never allowed herself to acknowledge. With a deep breath, she stepped into the circle. Light enveloped her, bright and intense, and suddenly, she was no longer in the hall. The palace had shifted around her, walls dissolving into mist, leaving her in a vast, shadowed landscape. Dark mountains rose in the distance, their peaks twisted and sharp, and rivers of silver fire ran through valleys of black stone. The figure from the pool emerged before her, larger and more imposing than she had imagined. Its form was fluid, neither fully human nor fully beast, and its eyes glowed with ancient knowledge. "You carry power," it said, its voice echoing in the empty expanse. "But you fear it. You fear what you cannot give, what you cannot create. That fear binds you." Ilara's chest tightened. I am nothing," she whispered, I am cursed. I cannot. You are more than your curse, Kale's voice said from behind her, though he was nowhere to be seen. You are strength, waiting to awaken. Theron's voice joined him, low and fierce. The palace reflects what lies within, Ilara. Stand tall. Claim what is yours. The figure advanced, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Shadows stretched toward her like claws, trying to pull her into despair. Ilara closed her eyes, centering herself, and for the first time, she reached inward, not outward. She thought of the warmth she had felt in the pool. The spark of potential that the twins had seen. The strength that had lain hidden for so long. A wave of light surged from her, pushing the shadows back. The figure faltered, and for the first time, Ilara felt the thrill of power, not fear, but control. The palace responded, the mist shifting into shapes that mirrored her confidence. Mountains softened, rivers calmed, and the shadowed landscape became a place of possibility rather than threat. Kale and Theron appeared beside her, materializing from the shadows. Kale's eyes were calm, approving. Theron's wild energy hummed with excitement. You have begun, Kale said. But there is more to face. Strength alone is not enough. The figure raised a hand, and visions flooded Ilara's mind. Memories not her own. Battles fought centuries ago. Choices made and unmade. Love given and taken. She felt herself pulled into the lives of those who had come before, the weight of history pressing against her heart. And yet, in the midst of it all, she sensed a thread connecting her to the twins. A bond stronger than blood or magic. One that could guide her through the trials to come. You are bound by more than fear, the figure said. You are bound by choice. Decide, and your path will be revealed. Ilara took a shaky breath. She could feel her power growing, pulsing through her veins like liquid fire. She thought of the twins, of their strength, and their trust in her potential, and she made her choice. She would face the palace, its shadows, and whatever lay beyond, not as a victim, but as a force in her own right. The figure dissolved into mist, leaving her standing in the now peaceful landscape. The palace reformed around her, the great hall returning, the circle of light still glowing on the floor. Kale and Theron watched her with expressions she could not fully read, pride, fascination, and something deeper, something unspoken. You did well, Kale said, stepping closer. You are learning not just to survive, but to command. That is rare. Theron's eyes softened as he looked at her. You have more courage than you realize, and more power. The palace cannot hide it any longer. Ilara felt a strange warmth in her chest. For the first time, she believed in herself, not in the reflection of what she had been told she lacked, but in the reality of what she could become. And yet, even as hope blossomed, a shadow lingered at the edge of her mind, a warning that the trials were far from over. In the days that followed, the palace continued its tests, each one more challenging than the last. Kale taught her to read the subtle movements of magic, to anticipate its flow and guide it without fear. Theron pushed her physically and mentally, forcing her to confront danger with clarity and strength. And through it all, Ilara discovered a new side of herself, a resilience she had never known, a boldness that surprised even the twins. As her skills grew, so did the bond between the three of them. Kale's calm authority grounded her, while Theron's wild energy inspired her. Together, they formed a triangle of power and trust, a delicate balance that was as thrilling as it was dangerous. Ilara found herself drawn to both, not merely out of desire, but out of admiration and the recognition of shared strength. One evening, as twilight settled over the palace, Ilara sat in the grand library, surrounded by ancient tomes and magical relics. She traced her fingers over the spines of the books, feeling the pulse of knowledge and power stored within. Kale approached silently, standing behind her. You are changing, he said softly. Not ride. Not just in skill, but in spirit. The palace recognizes it. I recognize it. Theron appeared then, leaning casually against the doorway. And yet, he said, his voice playful but edged with seriousness, you are not yet finished. The greatest test is yet to come. One that will challenge not only your power, but your heart. Ilara's pulse quickened. She had learned much, faced shadows and fear, and discovered strength she had never known. But the twins' words carried a weight that made her stomach tighten. Whatever awaited, it would demand everything from her. Not just courage or skill, but trust, and perhaps even love. That night, she returned to her chambers, her mind racing. She thought of the figure in the pool, of the shadows that had tried to bind her, and of the palace itself, alive and watchful. She realized that her journey was no longer about survival, it was about transformation. She was no longer a woman defined by barrenness and fear. She was becoming something more. Powerful, aware, and capable of shaping her own destiny. As she lay in bed, the palace whispered around her, the shadows stretching and curling like living things. She felt a presence at her window and opened her eyes to see Cale and Theron standing outside, watching her with those enigmatic expressions that made her heart race. You have grown stronger, Cale said quietly. And braver, Theron added, his voice carrying the same wild energy that both thrilled and unnerved her. Ilara sat up, meeting their eyes. I will face whatever comes, she whispered. I will not be afraid. The twins exchanged a glance, a silent communication only they could understand. And then, as if the palace itself had heard her declaration, a tremor ran through the halls. The shadows deepened, and a distant, echoing roar filled the air, vibrating through stone and magic alike. Ilara's breath caught. Whatever was coming, it was not a simple test. It was a force older than the palace, older than the kingdom itself, and it was moving closer. Cale stepped beside her, hand brushing hers in a fleeting, grounding touch. Prepare yourself, he said. The true trial begins now. Theron's eyes blazed, fierce and protective, and this time, there will be no holding back. Ilara stood, heart pounding, power stirring within her, and fear mingling with exhilaration. She was no longer the woman who whispered in darkness. She was a force in her own right. And the palace, alive with magic and shadows, was about to test her like never before. The storm was coming, and nothing would ever be the same. The palace trembled under the weight of a power older than the walls themselves. Shadows twisted violently, coiling and stretching like living serpents, while whispers of long-forgotten magic swirled through the halls. Ilara stood at the center of the grand hall, flanked by Cale and Theron, her heart pounding with anticipation, fear, and something she could not name, an exhilarating thrill of power and destiny. The figure from the pool, now fully manifest, emerged from the deepest shadows of the hall. Its form was immense and fluid, constantly shifting between human, beast, and something neither. Its eyes glowed with ancient knowledge and hunger. You dare rise against me, child of curse and power? It hissed, its voice echoing like thunder through the chamber. You are nothing. Ilara swallowed, her body trembling, but she refused to back down. She thought of the palace, alive and responsive, of the challenges she had faced, and of the spark of strength she had discovered within herself. She was no longer the frightened, powerless girl who had whispered her secret into the darkness. She was a force in her own right, and she would not be undone. Cale stepped forward, his calm authority radiating through the hall. You overestimate your power, he said, voice steady. Ilara is no longer the girl you think she is. She has learned to command what you cannot touch. Theron's eyes blazed, wild and untamed. Leave her be, or face the consequences, he growled. his voice carrying a weight of danger that made the shadows recoil. The figure laughed, a sound that chilled Elara's spine. "You think your mortals can challenge me? You underestimate the strength of the ancient." Elara raised her hands, summoning the magic that had grown within her over the past days. Light gathered around her, soft at first, then intense, pulsing like a heartbeat. Shadows recoiled, twisting back into themselves, as if the palace recognized the power of its new master. The figure hesitated, eyes narrowing. "You are strong," it said, voice tense. "But strength alone will not save you." Elara's voice rang out, steady despite the fear in her chest. "I am more than strength. I am choice, courage, and fire. I will not be ruled by fear any longer." The figure surged forward, dark tendrils of shadow lashing toward her. Elara moved with the confidence she had never known, twisting and stepping with precision, channeling her magic. Light met shadow, and the hall erupted in a display of swirling energy. Kael and Theron fought alongside her, their powers weaving with hers, creating a triangle of strength, trust, and unity. The battle tested her in ways she could not have imagined. The figure probed her fears, trying to break her spirit with illusions of failure, of loneliness, of the curse that had haunted her life. Yet with each attack, Elara remembered the lessons of the palace, the challenges set by the twins, and the vision of her own potential reflected in the water. She pushed back, transforming fear into power, uncertainty into determination. Kael's calm guidance anchored her. "Focus, Elara. Do not let it twist your mind." Theron's wild energy surged around her. "You are not alone. Remember that." Together, they became a force the figure had not anticipated. Shadows shrieked and recoiled as light radiated from Elara, flowing through the hall, through Kael and Theron, into the very stones themselves. The ancient power faltered, caught off guard by a mortal wielding magic born not just of skill, but of courage, love, and choice. In a final surge of determination, Elara stepped forward, placing her hands against the floor of the grand hall. Her magic spread outward, illuminating every shadow, revealing the hidden threads of the palace itself. The figure's form shimmered and weakened, unable to withstand the force of her will combined with the twins' power. "No!" the figure cried, voice breaking, as it dissolved into a storm of fading shadows. The hall trembled one last time before settling into calm, the shadows retreating to their corners, the palace itself sighing with relief and recognition. Elara sank to her knees, exhaustion coursing through her, but relief and exhilaration mingled with the power thrumming in her veins. Kael and Theron knelt beside her, their presence warm and protective. For a moment, none of them spoke, simply breathing in the quiet that followed the storm. "You have done more than survive," Kael said finally, his voice soft but full of admiration. "You have become part of this palace, part of its power, part of its story." Theron smiled, the wild energy in his eyes tempered by pride and wonder. "And you have proven something else, Elara. You are not defined by what you cannot give. You are defined by what you create, what you protect, and what you choose." Elara looked at them, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with magic. She had faced her fears, challenged an ancient force, and emerged not just alive, but transformed. The curse that had haunted her life no longer felt like a chain. It was part of the power she had embraced, part of the woman she had become. "You believe in me," she whispered, not as a question, but as a truth she could finally accept. Kael's hand brushed hers, gentle and grounding. "I do. We do." Theron stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "We always have, and we always will." The palace seemed to hum in agreement, its magic settling into a steady rhythm, acknowledging her as its new master in spirit, if not in birthright. The shadows were still there, yes, but they no longer threatened. They were part of the balance she now understood, part of the life she could shape and command. In the days that followed, the palace transformed under her presence. Light and shadow danced in harmony, corridors became more navigable, and magic flowed more freely, responding to her intent. Alara moved with confidence, mastering spells, understanding the palace's consciousness, and learning the full measure of her own strength. The bond between her and the twins deepened. Kale's steady authority grounded her, while Theron's untamed spirit challenged her, bringing out courage she had never known. Together, the three of them formed a new power within Arendor, one that balanced control, freedom, and unity. And in the quiet moments, away from challenges and magic, Alara felt a profound connection. A bond of trust and unspoken love. A promise that was stronger than any curse. One evening, she stood on the palace balcony, looking out over the kingdom. The sun, rare as it was in Arendor, broke through the clouds in streaks of gold and silver, casting light across the forests and mountains. The kingdom no longer felt oppressive or fearful. It was alive, vibrant, and full of potential, just as she was. Kael stepped beside her, his presence calm and unwavering. "The kingdom changes with you," he said quietly. Theron leaned against the balcony railing, wild energy softened by awe. "And so do we, Alara, because you remind us of what we can be, what we were meant to be." Alara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months lift from her shoulders. The fear, the isolation, the whispers of barrenness, they were gone. She had faced darkness, conquered it, and emerged, transformed. And now, for the first time, she could look forward to the future with hope, strength, and a heart unafraid to love and to be loved. Kael's hand found hers, steady and warm. Theron's hand rested lightly on her other shoulder, protective and fierce. In that moment, she understood the depth of the bond they shared, not just as allies or protectors, but as partners, equals, and something more profound. "You are ours," Theron said softly, echoing the words that had frightened her at first. But now, there was no threat in them. Only truth, trust, and choice. Alara smiled, feeling a joy she had never known. "Then we are together," she whispered, the words carrying power and certainty. "All of us. Together." The palace seemed to hum in response, its magic aligning with their union, the shadows and light coexisting in harmony. The curse that had once defined her was now transformed into the foundation of her strength, the spark that had ignited her journey. And as the night settled over Arendor, the three of them stood on the balcony, a new legend taking shape. One of courage, power, love, and transformation. One that would be remembered long after the shadows faded and the magic settled into the world they had claimed. The kingdom was safe, for now. But Alara knew that life, like magic, was never still. There would always be challenges, shadows to face, and choices to make. Yet she no longer feared them. With Kael and Theron at her side, she had discovered her own power, her own voice, and her own destiny. And in the quiet, triumphant hush of the palace, the three of them, woman and twin kings, looked out over Arendor, ready to face whatever came next. Together, the story of the cursed woman, the twin hybrid kings, and the Palace of Shadows had reached a new beginning. And in that beginning, they were unstoppable.